Sometimes it's really easy to tell why someone's done so well in their career. Steve's clarity of vision on this stuff is just on point. We learned about his journey over the last 20 plus years at Nike and the North Face. We also learned about his approach to listening to the customers in a variety of different methods, as well as what it's like to work with some of the best athletes in the world. I mean, he's gotten to work with people that run 2 hour marathons as well as, Kobe Bryant. So remember, if you like the show today, be a friend, tell a friend, and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show.
Influencers, inspiration, and Instagram, Instagram, Instagram. This is Earned by Tribe Dynamics. Here's Conor Begley.
Welcome to Earned, everybody. Today we are going to learn from one of the top CMOs of the world, Steve Lesnard. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
And big shout out to Sandrine, who we just did a podcast with, for recommending you. She's saying your praises pretty highly.
Sandrine is amazing.
Wait, how did you meet her?
I actually did a panel interview with a school in New York, and through that school in New York, it was just a small audience, 15 students. Through that, audience, I got introduced to Sandrine, and Sandrine and I have a lot in common, coming from France, the south of France, and some of what we've done, and so that's how the connection was made.
That's cool. I guess I didn't realize that you grew up there. How long were you in France before you came to the U.S.?
I grew up in between Paris and a little island called Corsica, where Napoleon was born. That's just one of our claim of fame over there. I basically went through high school and college in France, and then got my MBA in the US, and after that started to travel around the world.
That's really cool. That's gives you some unique perspective. I think particularly, if you look at kind of fashion, beauty, lifestyle, there's a lot of the best brands in the world have come out of France. Well, for those that don't know you, right? You are the CMO at the North Face and Global VP of Product Creation. Prior to that, you were at Nike for 21 years. I think you finished as the Global Vice President and GM of the running division. Is that correct? And
Correct,
then
yeah.
and during that time, you tripled the business, and then also had some hands in the Olympics as well. It sounds like, and really reviving that. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, that's a good summary. I've had the opportunity to do many different, jobs and experience at Nike, but obviously the Olympics and the running business was one of the, were some of the key highlights.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, before we get into your background, I wanted to kind of take a minute to reflect. And I know we all talk about the pandemic, but it just keeps going. So I think there's a reason to talk about it. When you started at the North Face, you were less than a year before the pandemic hit. Talk me through the last 18 months. Like, what has it been like managing through that process? Because you're managing very large teams, very big budgets. It's in a fast moving environment. Talk me through what that was like the last year and a half.
Yeah, I think challenging and interesting, are two words that come to mind. I think just to provide a little bit of context, the North Face moved their headquarters from Alameda in California, in the San Francisco, in the Bay Area, to Denver a few months before the pandemic hit. And with that, we had to recruit half of the team were new members that were recruited, with that move, and the other half came from Alameda, but were transplant. They were new to the Colorado and the Denver area. Then, the pandemic hit, and everyone is asked to stay home and to work from home. Some of my teammates had been in the office for less than a week, so you had to not only onboard people to a new company, to sometimes a new industry, but also completely pivot and adapt to a situation that was very fluid. I think for us, what I will remember of the pandemic is a real test to the company's mission and values. The North Face is all about enabling exploration for all in the outdoors, and obviously through the pandemic, all of our values were tested, and it was actually quite exciting to make some bold moves on behalf of a $3 billion brand that was embraced by the entire team immediately. I think there's a few that obviously a lot of brands such as the North Face decided to support first responders in
Mm-hmm.
many ways. We
Mm-hmm.
took money. We did collaboration with partners like Supreme to raise funds. But another thing that we did is one of our athletes was a first responder, and she stopped training. She's an elite climber. She stopped training to go back to the ICU. And at the time, we were like, Anna, why are you doing this? And she was like, the ICU is getting overcrowded. You guys don't see it yet, but my friends need my help. So I'm stopping my training. She was planning an expedition to go back to the ICU. And as a team, we quickly rallied and said, what could we do to help the medical and first responder community? And within 24 hours, we decided to treat first responders like our own family, our own athletes. So we basically told first responders through word of mouth with one email that they would get a discount, athletes discount. And we recruited and we the opportunity to serve over 1 million first responders in the US
Whoa.
through and support them. And obviously for us also, it was an incredible opportunity to recruit new consumer in our ecosystem. And now they're loyal members of the North Face Explore Pass family. So that was one example. I think another one was with all the civil unrest that we saw, we were the first brand to boycott Facebook and Instagram, at a time when we were not happy with how they were managing the platform. That was a pretty big, bold, and risk move for us because we were relying on this platform quite a bit. And the history there. We were one of the first global brands. 5,000 other global brands joined the movement. We had over 15 billion impressions just on that move that allowed us to speak to our values, and more importantly, it allowed us to get into a dialogue with Facebook to actually really work on meaningful progress, for their platform. And we're really pleased with the progress that have been made. So these are a couple of examples of what the pandemic was. Really lead with your values. And then on the team front, I think it was a rallying moment for existing teammates and new teammates to understand what the outdoors and what the North Face was about. But we also learned that we spend way too much time on Zoom. So we created what we call explore days. So days during the week, where people were not allowed to be on Zoom, so they could do their their own work, their work, and frankly get outside as well. And frankly, the Zoom fatigue is not going away, unfortunately. So we constantly think about new ways to pick up the phone, send an email, and just try to live your life without just Zoom.
I've definitely noticed it because my meetings used to be in person, right? Not on the computer, and I've noticed it with my eyes. Like it actually impacts like my vision. Like I'm just staring at a screen so much.
That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's I'm glad that you guys are doing that. That's we probably need to do a little bit more of it. We've kind of stuck with it and like, cameras on, the whole thing. But I think it might be time. I think it might be time to make some alterations there. I try to encourage phone calls as much as I can, for sure.
Good old phone calls. The other thing that worked for us is turn your camera when you want. You don't have to.
Yeah.
Because like one of the feedback we got from our teammates is it's exhausting to feel like you're always on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing that worked really well is twice we have 2 half days during the week
Yep.
that are free moments, no calls, no meetings, so that the team can frankly organize themselves, catch up, because we found ourselves being in Zoom for 6 to 9 hours a day, and then having to work later on to catch up on your own emails. And quickly we felt like that was really not healthy for the lifestyle that we're preaching. But it's a discipline that I think we need to continue to work on as we're not 100% back to the office.
Well, particularly in, an environment and then with a brand like you have, right? Going back to this idea of values, the people that join a brand like the North Face, an outdoors brand, like they want to see people, they want to be active, they want to do things. They don't want to stare at a screen all day, every day, right? That's not in their DNA, I would imagine. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, it makes a ton of sense.
I'll tell you what's interesting about the pandemic is I think it completely shifted the perception of having to be in the office in order to be efficient. And it allowed a lot of our teammates to actually work from anywhere. in the US and around the world. It's led to a new way to empower what we call exploration or adventure, or outdoor adventure. I had teammates working and still working from Europe, others working, in Australia, others working in, remote places in the US that where their family are from, or also, frankly, where they, there's the best powder in the wintertime or the best climbing or mountain biking in the summertime. And it's not affecting their performance at all. And I think it's really changing, the approach to where you work versus where you live. And I think it's a really healthy, I would say, conversation that happened. I worked from many different places, and it worked pretty well.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of it. I think people talk about work-life balance and like kind of saying like, oh, they have to be separate, right? And I actually think they can be integrated, right? Like you can go on a beautiful hike in the morning and then you can take the call in the car, right? Like after, like you sit in the car and take your call after you've been out there. I mean, we've spent the last year and a half going between, my family's house, my wife's family's house, our house, just kind of hopping between the locations and traveling. And it can be challenging at times, but it's the freedom. It's pretty fantastic. So let's take a step back. Let's go back to your time at Nike, right? So obviously that seems to have been has to have been the most formative experience in your career, and I'm sure it feels like a bunch of different careers, right? Because you were spending different times in different regions and different areas of business. So although it's under the same umbrella, like there's probably these mini careers. And I took the time to look at kind of where Nike was when you started, which is about $10 billion in value, up to where you left, which is 120 billion. And now I think it's up to 250 billion. So I'd love to, most people don't have the insight into what it looks like. What does that look like to have a brand that goes up 10x or 20x during the time that you're there? What was it about Nike and the way that business was done internally that made that such a sustainable brand over time? Like what, from your observations, what do you think were the driving factors there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, I think I can take all the credit for the growth of Nike, clearly.
Yeah.
It's been quite a privilege to be part of such an incredible ride. And the ride was not smooth. There was some bumps along the way, but I think for me, the key pillars that I would highlight as making the Nike brand such a powerful and successful brand are, first, a very clear and focused strategy. Nike's approach is to enter a business only to become the best in that business. So if you think about, when I joined in 97, Nike was not doing soccer. They had just signed the, Brazil, a national team, for the first time, not really serious soccer. It took them 15 years, but after 15 years, they became, number one, in soccer. In this, in the same token, I played a role in, trying to be serious in the outdoors for a while, which was serious. And also the women's business was really, really small. I was actually one of the few leaders that got the opportunity to start the business in Europe, in the US, and then globally, because it was mostly a male-dominated, team sport company.
Yep.
And another thing that was interesting is the lifestyle component. The world fashion at Nike when I joined was the F word was a bad word because probably just a sports company. And over time, the company and the leadership team, we showed that we could actually have deep rooted connection to the lifestyle side, while still being authentic to the DNA of the brand. If you also think about from an international, standpoint, Nike spend a lot of time in investing in becoming a local brand. So their efforts in Europe, I spent 8 years in Europe with Nike in different leadership positions there. They're focused in South America and in Asia, and particularly in China, where they invested in people, in time, and in resources to really, again, become the dominant player in each of these markets. And I would say the last key pillars for me when I look at Nike is innovation. A core part of the Nike brand has been anchored in truly driving disruptive innovation that has propelled the growth of the company in very successful way. So to me, these would be the three key pillars. The fourth one is probably the most magical one, is team.
Yep.
I think a really fun and strong entrepreneurial spirit at Nike, where you were empowered very quickly with big businesses to take calculated risk in order to serve the consumer that you were working for, and to the mission of the brand. And that I think was, made the place, very very fun place to be working in.
Yeah, that team becomes a really sustainable advantage over time, right? And I think it's part of the reason that you invest in a brand, because obviously it helps you from a sales and marketing perspective, but from a recruiting perspective, being kind of beloved as an entity just helps you to get the best people. And then once you have that level of talent, people want to stick around, they want to bring their friends, they want to bring the people that they respect. Um, it's a huge advantage, huge underrated advantage. I don't think people pay enough attention to.
I totally.
So let's talk about, I mean, I think two of the bigger pillars there for you, right, were the women's movement and specifically, the broader running movement that I think you were a big part of, and obviously the Olympics, right? I think the Olympics came first, so maybe we touch on that first. Give me a sense of,
Sure.
when you started working there, what did that program look like? And then, like you said, I think that, wanting to be number one in whatever it is that the company happens to do, I have to imagine drove a lot of the success there. So what was, where did it start and kind of where did it finish for you on the Olympic side?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of background. Nike used to be centered around pillars of excellence. You had advertising, you had product, and you had sales. They were three kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
And when I joined the team, and I came from product creation, I was what they call a shoe dog. I was
Okay.
making shoes. I used to work with, product is a huge part of what I've always done at Nike, and of course at the North Face, overseeing the product creation teams as well. And the Olympics was always looked at as an advertising moment for Nike. Yeah, if you remember the Atlanta games, there was a famous ad from Nike: "You don't win silver, you lose gold." And to me, when I looked at, when I decided to take over the Olympics, I actually pitched it to the president at the time, and his point was like, "Why are you asking me about the in 3 years? Let's talk in 2 years from now." And I say, no, the whole point is, let's use the Olympic as a stage to actually not only launch innovation that you can scale and make it a business opportunity, but also as a stage to actually engage consumers. Because what research would tell us is kids did not know when the Olympics would happen. They would only start caring, like a week before the game, and stop caring, right after the games. And I took over during the Beijing Olympics, and the preparation was a massive party for China and for sports in China. So what we ended up doing is aligning the product innovation pipeline in order to launch defining innovation for Nike through running and basketball at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and also really celebrating the coming out party of sports in China. So that was the pivotal point. And from then on, we created an Olympic specific team and divisions to start thinking about the Olympics as a stage for brand and product activation. And I had the opportunity to lead that, the Beijing Olympics and also the London Olympics, end to end, with the team, which led to some really fun experiences and incredible product launches, along the way.
Well, I remember you joking in our last conversation about, thinking you were an athlete until you spent time with the athletes inside the brands that you've been at. And I have to imagine that was the experience with all of the Olympic athletes.
Right. We were doing some testing. Right now, obviously working for the North Face, when you say you're an outdoors man and you like to ski or snowboard, you have to be very careful what you say, because your teammates are world-class skiers, and mountain bike. I remember following them going, "Oh dear, I made a mistake. Why am I here? Not belong on this slope right now," and I thought I did. I think in the Olympics, what was interesting, we were doing some testing as we were launching and testing a new foam technology, Lunar, at the time. And we had some decathletes, some basketball players, and we were just in awe by their physical, and athletic abilities in performing some of the most basic, I would say exercise that we thought we had mastered in training, for testing until these, athletes showed up. And essentially it's been, I've had lessons of athletic humility for the last 25 years, to be honest, because, this is the story of my, so when people ask me what I do, I say, I like to do things as opposed to I'm good, because I've learned my many, many times. Some of the athletes, the runners that used to run with, used to joke that in order to get their heart rate up running with me, they had to hold their breath. That summarizes their level of fitness versus mine.
Well, and they're also competitive as well, right? So it's like they're only going to lay it on.
Oh, I thought I was competitive until I ended up hanging out with these, athletes. I'll tell you, okay, an embarrassing story. I'm in Portland mountain biking, on a grade. It's not very uphill until I see someone, a runner, passing me. And I'm like, I'm on a bike. Like, how's that possible? Well, it was this Paul Radcliffe doing a light run, running a 550, mile pace, on an uphill. And I could not even keep up with her on a bike. That summarizes, my experiences, for the last 25.
Yeah, I don't even know. Because I haven't been exposed in the vast majority of sports to athletes of that caliber. So it's kind of weird to even think about what that would be like to witness, right? Like, what is it like to watch somebody run, a 5 minute, 4 minute mile? Like, I don't know.
I'll tell you the thing that for me, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the best athletes in the world. And I've learned a lot, from working with athletes, because I would say the three key, I would say defining personalities of these elite athletes is first their mindset. They're in constant search to improve themselves. So, like Kobe Bryant had a personal trainer to train his feet because he understood that being injured started with his feet. So, when we launched the free footwear platform, Kobe was one of the very first athletes that got into that platform because he understood the importance of training and training specific part of his bodies. When you think the only other thing that to me is always amazes me about athletes is um, they their competitive nature is such they're mostly competing against themselves. So every time there's a victory, they celebrate for half a nanoseconds, and then they're on the next thing.
Yeah.
Their resilience is amazing, particularly when it comes to adversities, whether it's injuries or defeat. How they spring back from these setback moments has always been very inspiring to me. It was interesting when we were working on the first Olympics that I worked on, the Beijing Olympics. One of the challenges was to get the U.S. basketball team to care. Mm-hmm. They had not won on the global stage since the Dream Team with Michael Jordan, and we needed to get LeBron, Kobe, all these superstars to actually care. And it was interesting to see how Coach K rallied them around a common goal and how the team came together. And the rest, is history, as they say, because since then we've seen what, the U.S. basketball team performance has been. But it's been really inspiring for me to work with athletes because I've taken a lot of these lessons and applied them to the business and my personal life, as well.
Well, and you talked about with the North Face, you have athletes that are not only competing against injury, but are, they're in life-threatening situations at times. And it's just it's not a risk that the vast majority of us face on a day-to-day basis, right? And so, it's
You're right. The amazing things about working for the North Face is the gear that we make protect and save our athletes' lives.
Yeah.
So when it comes to innovation and the testing, it's a whole different level from what I've been used to. And the amazing thing about our athletes at the North Face is when you talk to them, they talk about the fact that they're in constant risk assessment and management. When you're climbing a mountain as an alpinist, as a climber, as a big mountain skier or snowboarder, you're in constant evaluation of your surroundings to measure the percentage of risk that you're willing to take in order to get to your objective, which lead to an incredible amount of preparation. The level of preparation that these athletes in what they pack, in what they approach, and also their ability to make life decisions, instantly based on the risk assessment that they have has been quite inspiring and daunting at times as well, because their brain is constantly working,
Yeah.
to check their surroundings. And for us, obviously, it's led to, not only a really, really high level of testing for the gear that we produce, because what we don't want is for our athletes to think about their gear, or to be cold, or to be worried about cold, because hypothermia, when you're at an 8,000 meter peak, and it takes you 2 weeks to go back to base camp, is not an option, so that they can focus on what they do. So it's this the level of preparation of outdoor athletes and the risk that they're exposed with is definitely at a whole different level.
Yeah, it seems like your background has a unique or an interesting blend of kind of, obviously the product, the team building, the marketing, but then also the technology, right? Like I know that for you, I mean, like I personally use the Nike running app, right, when I was running, and I thought that that was really cool, and the innovation you had with the Apple Watch and all those kinds of things. Talk to me about that, the impact of that specifically on that women's division before we start diving into the North Face. How did
Sure.
that come to be? And then what, yeah, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, what's interesting is, if you look at, you have to to go back to the beginning of the century, like the year 2000 and 2000, 3, really, when we started to work with Apple. What we saw is that, and I was, at the time I was leading the women's division on the marketing side globally, and working on the Olympics. And then from then I transitioned to running, because during the Olympics, we started to work with Apple around this idea of, like a community around running. And there's two key observations that we saw at the time. The first one is the average marathon finisher in North America, was finishing a marathon in an average of 4 hours and 30 to 4 hours and 45 minutes. So most runners were not elite runners that were, running a sub 6 minute mile pace. They were running an 8.5 minute mile pace. They were everyday runner. The second thing that we saw is most runners were running with music. But at the time, running with music at a marathon would disqualify from finishing the marathon.
What?
Like you were disqualified if you were to put. And so, and the third element that we saw is this influx of 60% of finishers in marathons were female runners. And when we talked to female running community, their code and their definition of what running meant was very different from what the industry was looking at. At the time, it was all a quest about beating the Japanese brand through traditional, very meat to light type of product. And the consumer base that we were talking to wanted more color, wanted more comfort. They also wanted product they could wear before and after running. They had to look good and also perform, which led to a complete revolution in running. And Nike Plus came from that. Let's let people run with music. Runners like to log their miles. They had paper, like physical
Yeah.
logs. So the app would allow you to log, and record all your mileage. And then the other thing the app did is we ended up gamifying the app. We created challenges, we created goals. And around the Beijing Olympics, we created what we call the human race. We wanted 1 million people to run on the same day. We organized 35 races around the world on the same day, a week before the end of the Olympics, so that all Olympic athletes could come and race. And we used the Nike Plus platform to get 500,000 people to run on the same day and run for charity. And that was the beginning of challenges as well, gamifying. And I would say the rest is history, because when I left, we had over 150 million people on the platform. And the data that we had around the runners, knowing how they run, when they run, the insight that led to product creation based on running behavior and activity completely changed the. It was a really exciting ride to be part of.
Yeah, what's fascinating for me is that, that obviously it was a marketing investment, or at least, you were within that division. And it just seems like the vast majority of times, like that's not the way that people are thinking about marketing, right? Like that, I mean, you built like what would be independently a very valuable technology platform, right? Like, and it's just like super impressive that you guys were able to do that within a brand brand and then to have it have the success that it had. And also, you've mentioned in other interviews, how much time you spend kind of observing consumer behavior using either data, research, etc. What are some of the other paths you use? I mean, you've mentioned Google searches. Like, what are some of the ways that you do your own consumer research, or is most of it just observation?
When we used to travel, firsthand, observation in store, and in key events and races was always invaluable for our teams in general, the product creation team, the innovation teams, the marketing team, because you it allows you to understand how consumer actually use your product or your experiences, and it exposes clear pain points that you might have not thought about. Now, of course, with the digital tool that we have right now, we have great ways to actually, and track people in their journey, whether they're in store or online or in our platforms, to understand what they're interested in, how they're engaging with platform, and when are they, and what are the pain points that we have. So you mentioned obviously trends like, the Googles. It's this one, this is always for me a useful one to understand macro
Mm-hmm.
trends. Like we talked, like how to start running was, at the time, like there was over a billion search, between Europe and the US around how to start running. There was an influx of new runners that didn't know how
Yeah.
to run. So we created, and experiences to help onboard new runners. How to improve your run. What shoes should I wear? In the world that I live today with the North, you have a lot of these questions on how to climb, how to camp, what to pack. So that's one element. I think another element is really paying attention to the consumer journey of the communities that you serve, and try to be proactive in understanding what information they would need at what time. A good example for me is when you start thinking about camping, consumers in the world of in the world that I live in, start thinking about camping in February
Mm-hmm.
or March. The weather is really camping friendly, but that's when they're starting to really do their thinking. Traditional brands really talk about camping in May, June, and July. But by then, consumers have pretty much made up their choices on what they want to do and the brands they want to work with. So thinking and understanding your consumer journey and the timing at which you want to show up to maximize, the added value you can bring to their experience has been pivotal in a lot of the experience that I've had to really match what consumers expect with what brands can offer.
Absolutely. I mean, I can tell you from my own personal experience on the running side, I grew up playing sports, but actually didn't like running because it was punishment, right? So you get in trouble, you run a lap, right? You get run a mile, whatever. And so I actually didn't like it. But then I started using the app, and honestly, I just didn't know how to run, right? And it told so I went through one of the coaching sessions, and it was like, I want you to run slow, right? Take it easy. Like, I want you to finish this run and we go on the next run. And anyways, just went through this progression, and it totally changed my perception of the sport in general. And so, yeah, I just love that. I love that you talked about it in a few different ways, but this idea of just like, what is the question that the consumer is trying to answer, right? Like starting with that, like you've used questions as a way to like, how do I do this? What should I use? It's just a really interesting framework for then saying like, and then how do I help them answer that question in the right place at the right time, in the right format. Yeah, I love it. So let's jump into the North Face a little bit, right? So when I was looking at the data for the North Face, you guys saw a massive spike during your Gucci collaboration, right? So the collaboration with Gucci. You also mentioned the collaboration that you did with Supreme. Is that
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about this idea of brand collaboration. Again, you talked about Nike and Apple, right? That seems to be something that you invest in quite heavily. Is that something that has been increasing over time for you? Is it kind of stable over time? And what is it about those kind of brand collaborations that you seem to be attracted to?
Yeah, sure. So one of the unique things about the North Face is that it's probably the only outdoor brand right now, like I would say one of the very few athletic brands like Nike and Adidas that has a really strong performance
Mm.
anchor as an outdoor brand, but also has, a deep resonance with street and youth culture. It started, in New York in the 80s, with a lot of musicians and artists using North Face outerwear product to, frankly,
Yeah.
survive the winter. In New York, that created that deep connection. And so when you look at collaboration, my belief has always been that a successful collaboration is a collaboration that needs to align the company's values while adding new dimensions to both companies. So the North Face has a long history of collaboration. And when I joined the team, one of the things we wanted to do is to be very careful about how we would approach collaboration moving forward, to reduce the number of partners, to increase the quality and the depth of relationship. Supreme and North Face have been collaborating for years. It's a really symbiotic, relationship. We work really well with that team. They understand the brand. They're curators of the brand, which has been always really fun, to leverage. I think, when we came to Gucci, and when we started to connect with Gucci, the first question was, why would the brand work together? Do we have this? Do we have common values? And it was really exciting. And I know Robert Trifus was with you,
Yeah.
recently as well. Robert, I've done an incredible job at bringing, a Gucci dimension to, a North Face dimension. Clearly, the North Face is an outdoor brand. We care, obviously a lot about the environment and sustainability. Gucci has really high standard around sustainability as well, which was quite exciting. And then obviously our brand and our mantra is never stop exploring. It's about bringing new people into the world of exploration. And the Gucci team took that inspiration through the lens of creativity, but also in celebrating and bringing new people into the world of the outdoors. So the collaboration, we felt the values were really aligned. Then it became about, okay, what stories do we tell? And with Gucci was the first collaboration and campaign that we did. What we ended up doing is going back to the archive of some of our very first product ever created in the 70s, and the very first catalog that we did. And Alessandro, their creative director, really liked that 70s, authentic, camping vibe, and took these iconic original product from the North Face and added the magic, Gucci
Yeah.
twist to it. So much so, even if you think about what we did with, the soundtrack of the film that was created, the Creedence Clearwater Revival, was actually the band that their rehearsing studio was right next to North Face's very first store in
Oh,
Berkeley, and they were coming and performing in the store. And so it was a beautiful exercise of curations to celebrate the two brands coming together and celebrating the history of the North Face with a fresh perspective from Gucci. And I think it's important when we do collaboration that the two brands have similar values, have common objectives, and expand from each other reach as well.
yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to observe as well, because we pay a lot of attention to these collaborations, right? Because we have actually been seeing them increase in frequency and impact overall. And one of the things that Robert talked about in his interview was that, when he meets with a publisher now, he goes, guys, I love you, but we're actually a bigger publisher than you are now, right? Like Gucci, the brand, has a larger footprint as a publisher than almost all publishers in the world. Similar thing for the North Face. And so, yeah, it's just, it's a fascinating topic to see how that changes over time, right? Um,
Yeah, the world of publishing is really interesting. In the world of outdoors, obviously the ability for us to reach our community directly, based on the platform that we have, is quite significant. To Robert's point, we can go directly and in mass with consumers very effectively. We believe that publishing is still very important for us, particularly when it comes to reaching very specific communities, that are focused on one specific activity or environment as well. So we think that it's the publishing world is going to continue to be really important for us, but we do have now the ability to engage with our consumer one to one at scale, based on the platforms and the reach that we have, which is making the media landscape very dynamic Quite
Yeah, it's
exciting.
this weird blend of like publishing, customer service, community building, and again, the ability to connect just directly with your customers in a way that you couldn't previously. Um, I mean, there's a reason I'm in the industry. So let's talk about, while we're on this topic of publishers, another area that I think you've got very unique insight on is this concept of the kind of athlete athlete influencer, right? So obviously you've been working with athletes for a very long time before they were publishers themselves. And now they're in a position where they as well are some of the biggest publishers in the world. How has that increased the importance of those investments for you, both across both brands that you've seen? And maybe how's that changed the landscape in terms of, does that influence who you decide to work with as well? To say, okay, they're a fantastic athlete, but they also have an audience of 5.5 million people. Um, yeah, I'd love to hear about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the world of influencer has been evolving so fast and so dynamic. I would look at it in a few different parts. First, on
Yeah.
the athletes, right? I think the for the North Face or for Nike, but speaking about the North Face, I've always played a massive role in a few elements. First, they're the best at their craft, and therefore they their expectation around
Mhm.
product is at the
Yep.
highest level. If it works for them, or if we provide solutions for them, it's going to influence the rest of the community. I'll give you an example. When the North Face launched this Future Light technology, which is a nano spinning technology that provides full waterproofness, but very, very high breathability. Because traditional membranes, like that you see in the marketplace, create a trade-off. It's either
Mhm.
very waterproof
Yep.
or it's
Yep.
breathable. It's not both. And our basically saying after an incredible climb, you know what? It would have been great if I had a jacket that could skin that could breathe as hard as I do. Because as a climber, when you're hot, you take it off, then you put it back on and off and on, and you have to put your backpack and check your safety. So it's
Mhm.
very inefficient, and that innovation, which has changed completely how we even design product. For everyday consumers, because now you have product you don't need to layer as much. Your breathability means you're not going to sweat
Mhm.
inside. So working always been really important. Now what we see is athletes, as you said, influencer on their own and have their own brands and channels to manage. So it's been really fun and exciting to actually provide support and guidance to our athletes to help continue to develop their brand. And during the pandemic, when everybody was stuck inside, we actually relied heavily on our athletes to create their own content. Because again, our consumer were asking us, how do you deal with confinement? If you're a climber and you're on an expedition, you're going to be confined in a very tiny, spot, in your tent on a cliff for
Yeah.
weeks at a time. How do you deal with? So it led to, incredible content that we've created. How do you stay fit, when you cannot get outside? These were insights that were asked to our athletes, and we created an amazing amount of content, to reach our community while we were all stuck inside. So but the world of influencers have changed because you have now, through specific social platform, self-proclaimed influencers that are expert in their field, whether it's climbing, mountaineering, like setting up tents, shoe reviews, and it's been really interesting to actually identify one that we want to authentically create a connection with to work with them, because they are influential in their own right. They have a massive amount of followers because they spend a lot of time thinking about the content based on the activities that they feel they have an expertise in. So that world is very dynamic and is changing all the time. We will continue to invest in athletes and invest in also supporting their storytelling. We have millions of views around what we call how-to videos, tutorial videos during the pandemic. How to climb. I show up in the gym. I don't know what to do. Well, now the gyms are closed. How to camp. I want to go camping, but I've
Yeah,
actually never
yeah,
done it.
yeah.
What do I pack? Like pack when you go camping. Like I want to go hiking, but like for how long? What do I wear? And these are experiences that we leverage our athletes in their garage. We filmed in their garage were their own phones, incredible content that had millions of views and created more following. So it's a very dynamic environment, and one that I think is going to continue to be pivotal for any marketeers that want to connect authentically with their community, because you trust a friend's recommendation way more than you will trust a brand when it comes to like product recommendation, and that's why we have to continue to earn these authentic connection with the right
Yeah, I
influencers.
mean, we've seen authenticity, long-term relationship building, all these things be at the center of success, whether it's with an extreme athlete, someone with a large YouTube following, or somebody who's just getting started but has a community that really trusts them. And so it's great to hear that that's something that you found to be successful as well. Do you kind of separate internally, the athlete team versus the kind of social influencer team, or are they blended?
I would say the words are
Yeah.
colliding more and more, but there's still some very specific. In the world we're in, our sports marketing team have to seek to sign and to serve athletes in a way that is very specific to their needs. Again, when we have athletes right now planning or some expedition on Everest, the planning and the requirement around the gear and the support is very different from what everyday activities in the outdoors will be. But when it comes to engaging in their platform and content creation, that's where the lies. And this is where our digital content team gets very involved in working not only with our elite athletes, but with a lot of influencers to provide content and often creating bridges for them to connect with each other as well. Because the beauty about athletes is they're people first, and they go through the same hardship and setback. As I was telling you, like working with some of the best athletes in the world, they go through the same setback, highs and lows that we all go through. And so, and particularly outdoor athletes are extremely relatable and personable. And so, creating these bridges have proven to be really, really powerful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, before we get into kind of a final end of show fun question, there's one other thing that stood out. So it seems like for you, kind of mentorship and, ultimately leadership, but I think mentorship more specifically is something that you've invested in pretty heavily and something that you take pretty seriously. Where did that kind of passion for mentorship come from? And then what is your approach as a leader, right, to, helping somebody, right? Like, and be as tactical as you can, right? Like, what are the very specific things that you're doing, that help them? Because it seems like you've had that impact on a lot of people.
Well, yeah, I think I would say for me, it started with my parents and coaches. Growing up, that gave this sense of confidence and support in helping me achieve goals that I didn't think sometimes were even possible for me to achieve. I remember I spent a lot of time doing martial arts growing up, and my martial arts coach, asked me to do things or trusting me to do things that I
Yeah.
didn't even think I could do. Until I would do them and I would fail, and he would show me again, and then all of a sudden I could do them. And in my career, particularly through the rapid growth of Nike, I've experienced many different roles. I started in sports marketing, signing athletes. Then I was a shoe dog. Then I became a brand leader, and at the highest position. And then I run divisions. And throughout my career, what was always inspiring is watching how giving people opportunities to do things and try new things, even if they're not expert in their things. The company was growing so fast, and it was a belief of the company. Is something that I've always taken with me. It's not because you started in one division or department that you have to stay in that department or division. It's always about where is it that you want to go, and how can I help you get there? And I've had multiple roles in my career because I've always loved to learn from experts in different fields, and soak up as much as I could to apply it in my field. And so that's what I always try to do with the team that I work around. I always start with, what is it that you want to do? And I always love that question, because the answer is typically within a 2 to 3 year horizon. And I'm like, no, I'm not talking about that. Where do you tell me like 10 years from now, do you want to be the president? Do you want to be the CEO? And it often I get a reaction which is, whoa, like, do you think I could? And I'm like, I think you could. Do you think you could? Okay. And then from then the conversation changes. Okay, so what is interesting to you? What would be, exciting to you? And let me create pathways for you to have these experiences, because I truly believe that as a leader, you're only as good as your ability to really work effectively with teams. And I also think that if people feel appreciated, and if people feel like there's a vested interest in their development, you're going to get the best out of them and you get the highest retention. It always works for me. I've always been inspired by, the bosses and mentors that have done that with me and with others around. And that's what I try to emulate, as much as I can. It's the best job, to be honest.
It's funny. People, like you said, they don't think long enough term on this stuff. Like, I'm a huge fan of thinking in decades, not in years, right? Like, what do you want to accomplish over the next 10 years? And really saying, like, and it kind of puts it into perspective that, like, you have multiple blocks of 10 years left, right? Like, I still have another 3 decades of work to do, or 4 decades, right? What can I accomplish in 4 decades? Like, that's a lot of time. So it's really cool that you challenge people in that way. Okay, so let's do one fun end of show question. So, it seems as though you are quite the collector. So you do seem to like to collect different items. So I'd love to hear about what is the item that you have gone to the greatest lengths to acquire or to collect. So what is the item, and then what was that journey like?
Ooh, this is one of my derailer. I love product, and I love things that are related to a part of my life that is interesting. So you can see in my background, I collect comic books. I collect also toys, from me growing up, and a few of these, I collect sneakers, and I collect, jackets. I would say the most precious one is probably one that is related to a Nike experience around the Breaking Two event. I don't know if you remember that event. Essentially, it's working with athletes like Eliud Kipchoge. The idea was to see if a runner could run a marathon under 2 hours. And there was a question as to whether it was humanly possible, and if whether athletes would actually expose themselves to health issues or potentially death. So I was the team that helped not only create an incredible technology that has changed the face of running with the Vaporfly 4%, like a new foam with a new carbon fiber plate. And then we worked with 3 athletes. We put them on a course, a Formula One racing course in Monza. It was like launching a rocket. The temperature had to be perfect. The wind had to be perfect. It was not sanctioned by the running community because we had pacers. The pacers were all Olympic, medal athletes that were rotating to pace these 3 athletes. And we had a test line in front of it, that like mirroring the tents. As you can tell, any collection or collecting item for me has a story, right? And so Eliud Kipchoge, and by the way, it was a big media event. We actually had on Twitter more followers, 17 million followers, more than during the Super Bowl final. And it was a really early morning because it was in Italy. So, the time schedule was screwed up. And we had 99% failure rate. Yeah. We knew that we would fail. But we were like, if we can just get close, how inspiring that would be. Long story short, 2 of the first athletes break out after the first 10 miles. And we're like, oh dear. And Eliud Kipchoge is the last one doing it. I'm on the pit with the pacer. The pacers are more nervous than when they were racing for the Olympics. They're like, we cannot fail him. We got to keep up with this guy. Long story short, he fails by 40 seconds, and he basically completely changed the perspective, because when he crossed the finish line, he said, I'm opening the doors because I am just 40 seconds short of running under 2 hours. Now, and then, of course, the year later, he ran it again and did it under 2 hours, right? And then since then, it's like the mile record was broken once, and then he got broken many, many times right after. And why do I tell you this? Is because we made 2 shoes for Eliud. around that time, and he gave me one of them. So the second pair that he ran with, that he trained with, he gave to me. So that is very special because Elliot is an incredible inspiration of humility and human potential. But I could keep you for ages in telling you about stories about what I like. It's a real
It's a
problem.
good problem to have. Well, Steve, I really appreciate you taking out the time. I know I learned a lot today and had a lot of fun, and I'm sure everybody else will too. And good luck with the North Face and with everything else you have coming up in your career. And thanks again for taking out the time. It was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye,
I
Steve.
really enjoyed it.
Hit subscribe now. Earned by Tribe Dynamics. Tribe Dynamics unlocks your social media influencer community. Our platform not only tracks and measures your best influencer relationships, but discovers new influencers to grow your business through earned media. Get started with a demo today at tribedynamics.com. tribedynamics.com.